Welcome once again. This is the Brattlecast, an opportunity to talk with Ken Gloss, the proprietor of the very famous Brattle bookshop in Boston on West Street. I'm Jordan Rich, and we've known each other for many, many years, and I will say uncategorically, or is it categorically?
Either way.
Okay, thank you. You're one of the nicest guys I know. I think I'm a pretty nice guy, and that's the theme of today's podcast.
There is no question, Jordan, that you are, and it is. But one of the things that I learned from my father, and this goes way back, and I'll assure you, we had our differences. We had very different personalities. But one of the things that I learned from him, just by watching him and observing, is being nice to people. You don't have to be nice to everybody. There are some people that actually you get it out on because they're terrible people. But most people, being nice, and I saw this with my father, it actually is a tremendous benefit. It helps. First of all, it's just nice to be nice. But if people perceive you as being nice, interesting, a character, they'll help you out. When I was 6, 7, 8 years old, he used to go to these St. Vincent de Paul, Morgan Memorial. He'd go early in the morning. And the guys who worked those loading docks didn't have to be nice to him. He didn't have to be nice to them, except if they didn't like each other, they would never have let him in early. He got the first pick at a lot of things. But he also got them books, pointed things out to them. So they realized, hey, they didn't have a whole lot in common other than they liked him. One of the things that I really saw as he was doing business, he was a character. He loved to be in the press. He loved to get the name out there, and that's something that I really learned. It's very important. But for him, it was very much a part of his character. And he used to call up the Boston Globe and say, I've got a good story for you. Now, Jordan, you're in media, and you'll maybe understand this. He didn't call the reporter. He didn't call the editor.
I think I know where you're going.
He called Davis Taylor, the
publisher of the Globe.
Publisher up. And Davis Taylor would take his call and say, George, I don't have anything to do with editorial. And my father says, I know that, but I just want, of course, the next day there'd be a reporter at the store.
Of course.
But what I learned at that, Davis Taylor really enjoyed getting those calls because it sort of broke up his day, like my father. My father would get him books. There is absolutely no way at all ever my father would ever have gotten through the call if Davis Taylor didn't like him.
Well, let me suggest something, and this is an obvious suggestion, that when you're dealing with books of any kind, there's a conversation ready to be had. I mean, oh, that's an interesting book. I read another book by that author, whatever it might be. And I've been in the store many times. I've seen you in action and your team. And it's always interesting to see what people are buying and help them out, help them find something. But books lend themselves to conversation and cordiality.
Well, they lend themselves to conversation and cordiality. But I will tell you, there are a lot of book dealers who don't like the public, are very curmudgeonly, will talk if they think somebody is serious, will be a little bit difficult if they think they're just wasting their time. And they don't necessarily want to help everybody.
It sounds like your father was, and I'm sad that I never actually met him, but I knew of him. It sounds like he was the kind of guy who could, as you just pointed out, hobnob with kings and with paupers, and he had no problem. I mean, he didn't treat people differently. And I think that's the magic in that being nice to everybody. And then again, you've told story after story about amazing finds that are sort of accidental.
Well, absolutely. But a few people that I'll point out in how this works. He, long ago, he had a student coming in the store. The student didn't have very much money. He was in junior high school, and my father would either give him books or let him borrow the book, or instead of, at the time, maybe instead of a couple of dollars, maybe it was 50 cents or so on, and really sort of helped him out along. That student then went on, became a reporter, worked at the Boston Globe, always was friends. Then he was editorial editor of the Globe, Washington bureau editor, a man named Marty Nolan.
Oh,
and one of
very well-known name.
Very well known. When we had a fire in 1980, the fire was a front page story. Marty Nolan wrote a very even though it was a tragedy, a very glowing article. And he told me once, people at the Globe said, wait a minute, you're head of the Washington bureau. You're in Washington. Why? Are you right? And he said, well, they always were very nice to me.
Yeah.
They were always very friendly to me. Another situation, and again, you tend to get the ones where people who have become sort of important and so on, but this can be all sorts. But my father, one time, there was a lady, an older woman, and she used to bring in a lady who was blind. She would volunteer to take this lady around, and both of them loved books, and they'd see books and talk about them, and came in for years. And my father couldn't have been nicer, always loved seeing them. Well, this lady's last name was White. Her son actually went on to be quite a politician in Boston.
May it be Kevin Hagen White, the mayor.
And Kevin White loved the store too. He loved books. Matter of fact, he used to come in and we'd let him go down the basement sometimes when he needed a break from City Hall. But the way he first got to know my father and like it, and like him and loved the store was we were nice to his mother. And that's it. Now, here's a story that goes a little beyond that. When my father before he was in the book business, he was a bit of a radical and socialism and all of that. But he also, when the Sacco-Vanzetti case came up, he was someone who very much tried to support them and help and worked on all the committees and that. And this was years later. We were at a restaurant in the North End on Atlantic Avenue. The restaurant isn't there anymore. But it was a nice restaurant, 10 or 12 people, friends of his, many of them from the North End. And I was there and my wife. And in the back room, there were 4 young, older, but very smaller Italian men there. Mm-hmm. And they were having a private dinner because they were in the back room. And next thing you know, my father gets up and starts running over to them. And people at the table were cringing. And my father gets to the table, and they're all shaking hands. They're all friendly. They're, George, how you doing? We haven't seen you. It was the Angiulo brothers. There's the head of the New England mafia. My father had no clue whatsoever who they were. But he had worked with them on the Sacco-Vanzetti trial.
Wow.
And they loved him. They were friendly with him. I started seeing how that worked and how that was important. And in my career at the store, when our store burnt down in 1980, there was a shoe store next door to us. And we were friends with the people next door. We always got along. But when there was an empty lot for a few years, we said, park your car there. It's fine with us. No problem. And they always, like I said, got along. But because my father had been friends with them, I was friends, when they went to sell the building, they knew we were looking. They came to us first.
Yeah.
And that's how we have the building and the empty lot next to it, is because they liked us. They wanted to do us a favor.
These are life lessons, and I keep thinking of the word relationship. You build a relationship. It doesn't have to be a partnership, a business arrangement. It can just be a casual one. And even if nothing comes of it except you have this good feeling. And let's face it, you're in a public institution that people know about. It's been around forever. And the reputation is stellar because, you work hard at that.
Well, one of the things I always tell people when I do lectures is I don't have to know everything. Matter of fact, I couldn't know everything about books and book collecting and autograph. It's all the knowledge in the world. Mm-hmm. You never, ever know anything. All I have to do is know who does know and be on good enough terms that they'll either answer my email or return my call. That's the important part, is not only do you know who knows, but they'll actually talk to you if you ask. Would I, Jordan, not to put anything, if we didn't get along, would I be here?
No, it would be a really cringeworthy moment. You know, it reminds me of when I started in the broadcasting business in the late 70s. It reminds me of advice I had, and one of the pieces of advice was always treat the security guard, the receptionist, the stage door usher with the greatest respect and take good care of them, and they will always come through for you.
I'll tell you a story
you got one.
that I've got one about my wife, Joyce.
Mm-hmm.
When she got out of college and we first started going out, she worked for a publication that's not in business anymore called Ad East. It was an advertising
I remember it well.
publication, but she was one of the people who worked at Ad East. And she'd have to call up and interview some of the heads of the advertising departments. And she said, no, you've got to get to know the secretary. If she called up Mr. Arnold, she had to have her call. And that was what it is, that you have to be friendly there. And she knew, yeah, absolutely. When we're getting books at apartment buildings, boy, if the concierge or doorman doesn't like you, you don't get it. But if they like you, they'll go out of their way. And the way you do it is not by, doing overly, it's just being nice starts off.
Being respectful.
Return
and nice.
the favors.
Right, exactly.
The one other one that I'll point out is I had a friend, still a very, very good friend from college, who was an executive at Gillette. And he pointed this out, that when you came to his office, especially if it was for an interview, he said if people didn't realize that interview started the minute you saw the security guard at the door, his secretary in the office, and then get to see him, he said it's because...
Well, it's how you treat the help. I mean, you hear this all the time. When you're in a restaurant, and I know we both love to dine out and we live in the city, when you're in a restaurant and you see and hear someone berating a server for really no good reason and being rude, it just turns everybody off.
Well, absolutely. But when you're, over the years, the people who work at the store, the people who come in, the younger who might or might not ever be, you never know who they're going to be. You just treat people nicely.
As you treat me, and I hope I do the same for you.
Well, like I say, we both wouldn't be here if we didn't get along.
We do it remotely. I wouldn't have to look at you, and you wouldn't have to look at me. He's Ken Gloss. Go to brattlebookshop.com and continue to listen and review and rate the Brattlecast and send in your requests for topics. And I know you'd love to hear from folks.
Oh, absolutely. It's every once in a while someone calls in and you go, wow, people do listen.
Oh, they all over the world. See you next time, Ken.
Thank you.